Before we start on the imperative itself, there are a few things that you may want to have a look at and useful to know about. The first one is the present tense. Now, I've made some videos about the present tense that you may want to watch before. The other thing that might be useful is negative structures. Again, I've got a video on that. Reflexive verbs and object pronouns. There's a couple of videos on direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns that you might find useful. The imperative is the verbal form. We also talk about mood in grammar, the mood that you use to prompt someone to do something, or if you want to give an order or instructions. So if you want to give instructions to another person or other people, if I take this sentence to turn into an instruction, I'm simply going to get rid of the subject and probably change my intonation. Go to school. If I want to prevent someone to do something, I'm going to use the negative, and in English it looks like that. Don't do that. If I'm included in the instructions, if I say, for example, we go to school, what I'm going to do is exactly the same. I'm going to get rid of the subject. But then if I say go to school, it applies to somebody else. If I want to include myself in English, I'm going to say let us go to school. Let's go to school. Before we move on, just a quick reminder that in French there are several ways to say you. So it can be tu for one person you know well, familiar form. You can say vous for one person you don't know that well, as a sign of respect, the formal form. But vous can also be for more than one person, so the plural, for several people. And then a reminder that we is nous. The way it works in French is exactly the same as English. You take the present tense and you get rid of the subject. Simple. Just a reminder of the present tense, and we are focusing on these three forms, or three subject pronouns, tu, vous, and nous. You see that you've got the present tense forms of the three different categories of verbs, er, ir, and re. To form the imperative, you are going to get rid of the subject, and that's what you're left with. One little thing to remember, however, is that for er verbs, the tu form, the second person, you will need to remember to get rid of the s. Knock off the s. There's no impact on pronunciation, but it's something you need to remember in writing, for example. Finally, irregular verbs will be the same as they normally are in the present tense. I said normally because there may be some exceptions. So far so good, but of course there are a couple of things you need to remember. I've just told you that the tu form loses its s in the imperative, but it comes back before pronouns like i and en for pronunciation purposes. For example, if I say va au supermarché, go to the supermarket, this is the imperative. But if I say vas-y, I then put the s back. If I say mange des fruits, again the imperative, it's a command and advice. If I say eat some, I'm going to say mange-en. So the s comes back. The other thing to remember, I did mention that irregular verbs normally keep their form, but there are irregular forms in the imperative, and here are the verbs that will have a specific form. So we've got aller, it becomes va, aller, allons. Avoir, est, ayez, ayons. Être, soit, soyez, soyons. Savoir, sache, sachez, sachons, and vouloir, veuille, veuillez, veuillons. The negative form works the same. If I take this sentence in the imperative, va au supermarché, what we do is put ne, the negative sign, before the verb, and the other part of the negative, pas, after the verb. Ne va pas au supermarché. Another example, faites ça, do that, becomes ne faites plus ça. I've got ne before the verb and plus after the verb. With reflexive verbs, if I take this sentence, tu te reposes, remember you have the reflexive pronouns te. What will happen in imperative is that it will go at the end with a little hyphen before and be turned into toi. So te becomes toi, repose-toi. With vous, vous levez, you get up. That's not the imperative, vous vous levez, it's the normal present tense reflexive structure. In the imperative, it's going to be levez-vous, again with the reflexive pronoun at the end with an hyphen just before. Lastly, nous nous calmons, we calm down. If we want to say let's calm down, you have guessed, we are going to say calmons-nous, exactly the same as the other two. Now, if we want to apply the rule with object pronouns, for example, get me up or get them up, you see that the only difference in terms of object pronouns are the first two, okay? Because moi, toi are different from the normal object pronouns. Let's see how. So for direct object pronouns, if I take a couple of examples to show you the difference, je le prends, I take it, is the pronoun, I take it, the pronoun it. If I put it in the imperative, it stays the same, prends-le. Now, if I say il me respecte, he respects me, the pronoun me in the imperative will become moi, respectez-moi. So it is different from the normal pronoun. For indirect object pronouns, tu leur écris, you write to them, écris-leur stays the same, the pronoun stays the same in the imperative. But if I say elle me parle, she speaks to me, in the imperative, the me will become moi. So we end up with parle-moi. Let's practice together. Your task is to put these sentences on the left into the imperative. So for number 1, we have tu dois fermer la fenêtre, you must close the window. We have the verb, the infinitive verb fermer. The present tense form with tu in the present tense would be tu fermes with an S at the end. But of course, it's the imperative, so the tu form loses its S and we get rid of the subject. Therefore, we end up with ferme la fenêtre, close the window. For number 2, vous devez aller chez le médecin. We've got the infinitive aller. In the present tense, we would end up with vous allez, with EZ. Therefore, the imperative is aller chez le médecin. Nous devons faire les courses. We've got the verb faire. In the present tense, we'd end up with nous faisons. Therefore, the imperative is going to be faisons les courses. For number 4, we have a negative, but we've got the verb être, which is irregular. Not much more difficult. For number 4, with tu is going to be soit, and then we've got ne and pas. Ne sois pas triste. Vous ne devez pas avoir peur. We've got the verb avoir. We've got vous and we've got ne pas. Therefore, don't be scared is going to be n'ayez pas peur. Then finally, we've got a reflexive verb with tu. So, tu relaxes, tu te relaxes would be the present tense. But then, of course, we know that with reflexive verbs, we are going to put the pronoun at the end and that the te is going to become toi. So, relax is going to be relaxe-toi. I have used phonics in this lesson, so if you want to find out a bit more, you can watch this lesson and download the summary sheet from my website.